Her true story from Arizona. I took care of the whole family, and they took my bed on Christmas. The burden is just someone who eats, complains, and doesn't know when to leave. My daughter-in-law clears her throat and adds a final remark, as though delivering a verdict. Her choice of words echoes in my head, looping again and again. I don't respond. I simply stand there, the cup of cold tea growing heavier in my hand. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and turkey just minutes ago. Now the air is filled with silence I cannot swallow. I stand in front of the sink, still wearing my flour-dusted apron from baking cookies, frozen from all the years I spent feeding this family. My hands tremble slightly as I hold the cup of cold tea I forgot to drink. The cookie scent clings to my clothes, mixing with the sweet stink of stale air in a house that no longer feels like home. I hear footsteps behind me, soft at first, then a door opens and then the voice. "The kids need the room. You can sleep on the floor, Grandma. It's just for one night." Those words cut through me sharper than any knife, and I slowly turn around, my heart settling into a pool of stunned disbelief. My daughter-in-law stands there in her holiday dress, perfectly put together, her voice calm as if she is telling me something ordinary. Every muscle in my body tightens. I glance toward the living room, where the lights are strung on a tree and the gifts are piled high. My bedroom door stands open, but beyond it is chaos. Pillows tossed, toys scattered, blankets unmade, and a tiny mattress dropped hastily in the corner. I understand now. They have taken my bed for the children. My bed. In my own home. My son stands behind her, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He doesn't speak or look at me. He only nods once, an acknowledgement that I exist, but not enough to dispute the injustice I am facing. He lets her speak for him, as if she is the voice of the house, the voice of reason, the one who decides who belongs and who doesn't. The youngest grandchild, little Emma, comes skipping into the room, jumps up on what used to be my mattress. She wiggles her toes and beams, oblivious to the tension filling the air. She looks directly at me and says, "I love this bed, Grandma," and then clutches onto a pillow, giggling loudly. I watch her with aching heart, realizing she doesn't understand what's happening. Why her joy is my sorrow. I walk into the hallway, each step softer but heavier. My bedroom door stands open, my room, once sacred, now overtaken by tiny jackets on the floor, glitter from gift wrap, and the echo of voices that do not call my name. I stare at the empty bed I used to rest in and feel a sharpness at the back of my throat, the kind that comes before a cry you refuse to let escape. I straighten the blanket out of habit, though I no longer have a place beneath it. I pick up my pillow from the corner where they tossed it and carry it back into the living room. I do not put it on the mattress. I place it gently on the armchair where I used to sit and read to the children before they decided bedtime stories were outdated. I sit down, cradling the pillow against my chest like a shield, and stare into the dim light. Something inside me flickers. Not grief, not surrender, something older, sharper. I realize then that love given without respect is not love at all. It is labor. And tonight, I am clocking out, not from caring, but from allowing myself to be treated as disposable. This Christmas will not be my quiet end. It will be the night I start over. A rebirth in the soft hush of snowfall, in the rustle of ignored footsteps, in the silence of a heart deciding it deserves more. In the corner, a stray cat slips into the room, unnoticed by anyone but me. It brushes against my leg, its body warm and soft, a quiet comfort in a house that no longer feels like mine. I kneel, stroking its fur gently, and whisper, "Not tonight, sweetheart, but tomorrow." The cat purrs in response, its presence the only kindness I've felt all evening. I straighten my back and walk slowly upstairs to the spare room, my steps heavy with exhaustion and something deeper, resignation. I lay out a thin mat on the floor, place my tea on the side table, fold my glasses beside it. I smooth the blanket over me, every thread a reminder of how little I now own in this house. I close my eyes and imagine the snow falling quietly outside, the hush of winter cloaking everything, but inside me something stirs. I am not done. I imagine taking back what was mine, not just the bed, but the respect that once filled this home. I may be small, but I am not invisible. I may be old, but I am not done. Tonight, they took my bed. Tomorrow, I will remember who I am, and I will not be quiet. I tried to remember the last birthday I had. I couldn't. No card, no cake, no honey, what would you like? Nothing for Mother's Day. Not a single celebration of all I had done. Instead, they celebrated everything else. Their promotions, their new car, their Little League wins, their holidays. I watched behind a camera. I applauded, but I was never the one being celebrated. I remember waking up one morning to find the guest room filled with bunk beds. 2 small beds for the kids shoved close together, leaving no breathing room. My spare bed was nowhere to be seen. I asked where my quilts were. My daughter-in-law said they moved them. "We wanted to make room for the kids' stuff," she said, as though taking away my memories would bring her grandchildren more joy. I sat on the edge of the bunk beds and stared at the empty space where my quilt used to lie. My heart ached. It hurt not just because they took my things, but because they didn't seem to notice. I felt invisible, like furniture that could be moved and replaced at will. The worst moment came one evening when I called out softly, "Dinner's ready?" I waited by the dining table, heart full of hope, only to hear laughter and clinking dishes from another room. I walked in to see them gathered in the family room with takeout boxes, watching a movie. They had dinner without me. It was the first time I realized I was optional. A shadow of regret passed through me. I thought of the young woman I once was, strong, caring, capable. I thought of the empty credit card statements I paid off, the nights I stayed up with sick children, the times I canceled plans for their school concerts, and now I had no room, no recognition, no place. One afternoon, I overheard my daughters-in-law talking quietly in the kitchen while I washed dishes. "She's just here because she has nowhere else to go," one said. The other laughed softly. "Yeah, and that room? We're thinking of painting it pink next month. The girls will love it, and they did it within a week." I carry the mug to the kitchen table and sit in the same chair I always do, the one closest to the window. Morning light creeps in through the curtains, soft and unassuming. It touches the same counters I once wiped down with love, the same stove I stood over for years making meals no one thanked me for. Everything looks familiar, but feels foreign. The house has my fingerprints. As I stare out the window, the ache in my back sharpens and reminds me again. I am not young anymore, but I am still here. I am still watching, still remembering. I glance over at the refrigerator and see last night's leftovers, the ones I made but did not eat. They will reheat them today and still not ask how I slept. The door creaks upstairs. Footsteps. A child laughs. A phone buzzes. Life continues, just as it did yesterday and the day before. But I have changed. Last night, something inside me shifted. I have been erased in this house, slowly, piece by piece, but I am done letting them finish the job. I rise from the table, spine stiff but heart steadier. I pour the last of the tea into the sink. I do not want to be invisible anymore. As I stand there, I notice the old cardboard box tucked beneath the edge of the air mattress. It's the box I hid under the bed the night they moved in years ago. A box of memories, old photographs, letters, and the stack of legal papers I managed to free from prying eyes. My breath catches. I slide to my knees and reach inside. My fingers brush against worn folders, an envelope stamped with my name, and then something firmer. I pull it out, and my heart stops. It is my deed. The official, legal deed to this house. My name printed on it as full owner. The edges are fraying, but the ink is clear and undeniable. My hands tremble. I cradle the paper as though it might crumble into dust if I'm not careful. The deed. That sacred promise I made when I sold my car and used my savings to pay off the mortgage, the same deed I never let them touch. I strengthened our family's foundation with my own hands, and now they have no idea. They thought they owned this place. I thought I had let them. I sit down in the middle of the floor, clutching the deed like a lifeline. Memories flicker like old snapshots in my mind's eye. Signing the papers at the bank, the proud day I handed over the final check, the relief I felt knowing this place would be our home. My son was barely out of high school then, full of ambition and dreams. I had believed he'd build something of his own. Instead, he asked to stay here when times got tough, and we welcomed him. Welcomed them all. It was an act of love, or at least I meant it so, But I never expected us to forget. I trace my fingers across my name on the paper. I am the owner. I own this kitchen, these walls, the air that fills this house. I am not a renter. I am not a guest. I am not a burden. And I am certainly not someone who can be dismissed with a single statement, "You can sleep on the floor for one night," because one night can stretch into years, and you can only pack away your dignity for so long before there is nothing left. I lean back against the mattress and let the deed slide across my lap. I feel something shift inside me. It is like waking up again. Not physically, my body is still sore, but awake in my soul. The floor beneath me is not just cold, it has become a threshold. On one side, the place where they see me. On the other side, the place where I see myself. I stand slowly, still clutching the deed. I walk toward the living room and find the tree lights dimmed from yesterday, the ornaments dusty from a night's abandonment. I kneel and snatch back a ribbon they left dangling. Stash it behind my back. This house is mine, and every inch matters. I think of the key ring hanging near the front door, the one with a dozen keys. Garage, shed, utility room. One of them is the main house key. It fit perfectly into that front door, whose knob I polished weekly. I remember walking through that door at midnight, after holiday shopping, to tuck new blankets into the guest room they claim is for them. I remember painting the porch white, planting flowers outside, stapling a wreath to the door for their arrivals, and all I received in return was a thin mat on the floor. My vision narrows to a plan forming inside me, but not yet, not today. Today, I will reclaim my presence. I press the deed flat across my chest as I walk to the living room window and glance at the driveway. Their cars are still there, a sedan, 2 SUVs. They are sleeping comfortably inside. They have a roof that came from the sweat of my labor. But tonight, I will let them hold on to it. Just one more morning of ignorance. I walk back to the box, open it again, and find a small envelope addressed to me in my own handwriting. My heart clenches. I open it. Inside is the key to the house, the one I always carried but never used since they moved in. I press it in my palm. So many years I shook my head when my son said, "You can just live in your room." "Yes," I said, because I thought that was right, because I didn't want to become the story where grandma shuts kids out when I didn't want to be that person. I stare at the key and feel the weight of its promise. This is not simply metal. It is choice. I walk into the kitchen, slip the key into my apron pocket, and breathe through a smile that tastes like thunder. I think of the nuts I will roast in the oven, the cinnamon rolls I will bake later, the fire I'll build for tonight. Yes, this house is mine, and the warmth of it is mine too. They can still celebrate Christmas, eat turkey, laugh at kids opening presents. They can still call this place home, but not unchallenged, not without boundaries, not without acknowledging that someone stepped forward when they couldn't stand. I sit back quietly. The lights of the tree dim until tomorrow morning. I let the house breathe under my eyes. If they notice me or care tonight, that is on them. If they treat me as a guest forever, that is their choice. But now I know the truth. This roof belongs to me. And now, someday soon, I will show them what claiming your own life looks like. Because one day of taking my bed was contemptible, but a lifetime of living here on my terms, that will be unforgettable. After finding the deed and key, I did not act immediately. I sat with them, tracing my name on the paper and turning the weight of that key over in my palm. I needed certainty before I stepped forward again. So I made a phone call. It was quiet. The first words carried more tension because I had not made them yet. "Hello, Mr. Harris, this is Helen Carroll." He paused for a moment, then cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carroll, I haven't heard that name in years. How are you?" I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. "I am well enough. I need your help." He asked where I was. We spoke in undercurrents and half-words, so none of them could overhear. I told him I had found documents proving deeds, mortgages, my name as landlord, and the destruction of my property. He said he would check our records, confirm any unpaid loans or existing lease terms, and call me back by day's end. We ended our conversation with polite distance, me holding the key, him assuring discretion. After that, I moved through my days with careful purpose. I started cooking again, something I hadn't done since I discovered the deed. I made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, broccoli with garlic, and one of those apple pies they used to devour in minutes. I set the table as usual, lit a candle, whispered a blessing under my breath. I made sure my presence still felt peaceful, almost invisible, like wind around a candle's flame. But while I was feeding them, I was also planning. In the afternoons, I went into the guest room, except that little bunk bedroom was no longer mine, so I took to packing in the closet of my former hall coat. First the quilts, my mother's quilt, the one I stitched with my granddaughter when she was a baby. Then the photo albums, one for birthdays, one for holidays, one full of old wedding and prom pics. I folded them with gentle care and placed them in plastic bins. I tucked in handwritten letters, recipes I'd written down in neat cursive, a pair of reading glasses. Each evening, after I washed the dishes, I brought another box downstairs and slipped it under the staircase. My steps were quiet, deliberate. No one asked questions. No one noticed the box that appeared night after night. I packed scarves, my old gardening gloves, the knitted shawl I kept for chilly mornings. I took a single china plate, a gift from my late husband, and wrapped it in an old scarf. That item went into a cloth bag I tied and left by the front door. I did not stop cooking or cleaning. I did not announce what I was doing. I smiled as I passed the hallway. I complimented my daughter-in-law's cooking when she attempted something new. I carried the turkey to the table. I laughed at my grandchildren's silly jokes. I had not lost my love, but the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer invisible, but I was no longer theirs to borrow. I called Mr. Harris again. He told me there was no standing lease, no tenancy recorded. Legally, this was still my house. I could issue a notice to vacate. I told him fine. I would obtain the paperwork, file it, and ask him to come to the house when I was ready. He reminded me that once the process started, it could not be reversed easily. I nodded even though he could not see me. I understood. That afternoon, I paused in front of the door to the junk room, once the guest room. I opened it and breathed in the smell of innocence and entitlement. I felt calmer than I had in weeks. I realized this place had belonged to me long before they came and would remain mine after they left. The thought no longer made me feel guilty. It made me feel strong. I gently took out the cushion I kept from my reading corner and tucked it into one of my boxes. I picked up a small ceramic pot with lavender I had planted years ago. It had survived the move and still thrived. I wrapped it carefully and carried it to the back hallway. The lavender's scent lingered in the air I passed through. I was taking what I valued most, not in anger, not in malice, but in self-preservation. I heard the kids downstairs laughing over a board game. I pressed my hand to the doorframe and closed my eyes. Part of me missed the chaos. Part of me belonged to those moments. But I belonged to myself now, more than I belonged to a chaotic din that dismissed me. My daughter-in-law came up in the afternoon, called downstairs for something, then saw me by the closet doorway. She paused, then walked away without a word. That was all I needed. She saw me, and she didn't ask what I was doing. That too spoke volumes. I realized then that none of them were asking me whether I was okay. No one was worried if I missed my bed or my things. So I told myself I could no longer allow their apathy dictate my life. I would not appear hurt. I would simply walk away, if I needed to, and they could wonder why. And that would be enough. Over the next few days, I finished packing. My china was safe in my car. I left only everyday dishes in the cabinet and folded half a dozen towels on the bathroom rack. I left no notes, no warnings. I left everything they might need for one more week. I left quiet remnants of my life behind so they wouldn't notice too quickly. Every night, I drank my tea in my favorite armchair. It was the same chair I'd given to my son, the one he'd test-sat 100 times growing up. I closed the front window's blinds just enough so the rainbow reflections from the Christmas lights still flickered across the floor. Sometimes I found myself humming, low and easy, remembering the lullabies I used to hum to babies at midnight feedings. On the fourth night, I stood by the front window as car lights pulled into the driveway. The house glowed inside. Shadows shifted behind the curtains. I pressed the deed into my coat pocket, felt the key in my breast. I was ready. They did not suspect a thing. They believed this was still their house, and for so long, they believed I was still theirs. But I was preparing for the moment they would realize that living here had always been a gift, and that gifts can be taken back. silently, carefully, with intention. In the days ahead, I would claim my voice. I would reclaim my presence. I would ask them to leave. Not because I hated them, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed respect and boundaries, and I needed them to know that caring for them did not give them leave to take me for granted. Without noise or spectacle, I was getting ready. And soon, very soon, they would learn that I was not invisible. I am not furniture. I am not a burden. I am the owner of this house and of my life. On the evening of December 31st, I stood in the kitchen under the warm glow of string lights still hanging from Christmas. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket, and without hesitation I opened my messaging app. I typed carefully into the family group chat, "Please be out of the house by January 3rd. The owner has other plans." I pressed send before a single doubt could freeze my fingers. After that, I stepped back and watched. I finished washing the dishes, humming a tune I learned as a child. I clipped a few sprigs of rosemary from my garden and arranged them on the kitchen counter. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea and poured myself a cup, savoring the silence as the rest of the family scattered in confusion and fear. I could hear a ping on my phone. I checked the group chat. My daughter-in-law had already typed, "What does this mean? Are we being evicted?" Then my son, "What's wrong? Who is selling the house?" My grandchildren asked, "Grandma, did you sell it? Did we do something wrong?" Messages appeared one after another, frantic and anxious, until I turned off the notifications, wanting them to feel the urgency of what I had said before anything else filled their minds. Finally, my son came into the kitchen. He stood at the threshold, hesitation in his eyes. "Mom, is this a joke?" he asked. My daughter-in-law followed, wrapping her arms around her body as though bracing against a chill. The two older grandchildren peeked in behind them, faces flushed and frightened. I held the deed in my hand, the same paper I found under the mattress weeks ago. I offered it to my son. "I am the owner," I said, voice calm and steady. "I'm just finally acting like it." My son's jaw dropped, his face drained of color. He took the paper hesitantly and scanned it, confusion and betrayal flickering in his eyes. He looked back at me and asked, "Mom, you never said. How could you not tell us?" I didn't defend myself. I simply said, "Because no one asked, because it became easier to let them live here than to remember I had the right to say no." They entered the kitchen fully now, 2 adults and 2 kids, peering at me as though I'd stepped out of shadows. My daughter-in-law lowered her eyes, voice cracking as she spoke. I'm sorry, I didn't know." My granddaughter Emma whispered, "Grandma, I'm scared." Her little brother Jack looked furious. "You can't do this to us," he said. My son looked at me with sorrow and regret. "Mom, we thought we were at home here. We didn't even think about paperwork or ownership. We thought this was family." He knelt and handed back the deed. "Please, whatever this is, can't we talk about it?" I placed the deed back on the counter and touched his shoulder lightly. That was our first conversation. They weren't asking when I needed space. They didn't ask when they took my bed. They never asked how I felt. They just assumed. My daughter-in-law began crying. She clutched the edge of the kitchen chair as sobs shook her. "We never meant to hurt you," she choked. We thought we were helping." I closed my eyes and whispered, "I hope you thought you were helping." I poured each of us a small cup of tea and set them on the table. "I'd like you to sit," I said softly. "We need to talk, but not about moving out." They looked at me, confused again. I continued, "I don't want you to leave in panic. I just need you to respect that I own this house, that I have a voice, that this is not a shared inheritance. It's my home. Yours too for now, but with rules, clarity, and respect." The room hummed with tension. My grandchildren stared at me with wide eyes, as though seeing their grandmother for the first time. My son wiped his eyes and nodded. My daughter-in-law took a shaky breath and said, "Okay, Mom, we'll stay. We'll help fix this. Please help us fix this." I nodded back. "We start tonight. Not in court, in this kitchen." The children sat on the floor beside the table. My daughter-in-law sank into a chair, and my son remained standing, arms folded as though needing time to adjust. I looked at Emma and Jack. "I won't sleep on the floor anymore," I said. They both exhaled, relief visible. "But the mattress stays. We all helped pay for the utilities this month," I added. "Let's acknowledge that. Let's live here with gratitude." My son blinked hard and said, "Yes, Absolutely. My daughter-in-law wiped her cheek and said, "Mom, I'm so sorry we didn't see. I'm ready to make space." So we sat together that New Year's Eve, breathing the same air, sharing warmth beyond the stove fire. Outside, fireworks began to pop, but inside the kitchen, our resolutions were quieter, steadier. Respect, gratitude, space, and acknowledgement. When January 3rd arrives, I am not going to change the locks. I am not calling movers. I won't need a court order. They will still be here, because they chose respect over fear. Tonight, though, I close my eyes filled with purpose. Tonight, I sleep knowing I am not a furniture piece to be pushed aside. Tonight, I prove that you can reclaim a home with words, papers, and dignity, not drama. And as the new year begins, we step together, not as renters, not as obligations, but as a family aligned by choice, not silence. Their shock was the sound of awakening. Their tears, the first honest conversation we've had in years. The deed was the truth bomb that shook us awake. And now we are awake, together. On the morning of January 3rd, I opened my front door before sunrise. The sky was pale blue, with the last hints of winter's night. The street was quiet, except for the hum of the van idling in my driveway. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. My heart was steady, no tremor in my chest. I was not afraid of what the day would bring. They moved like ghosts in the cold light. My son carried a cardboard box, labeled, "Kitchen, Mom's?" My daughter-in-law wheeled out a suitcase. The grandchildren tiptoed behind them, holding stuffed animals. None of them looked at me, but they didn't need to. The deed had spoken for me. The text on my phone, the calm I had held in the kitchen, those words carried more authority than any argument. I watched as they opened the back of the van and began stacking furniture. I saw their hands lift the dining chairs, the sofa cushions, the twins' bunk beds. They were taking their remnants, the things they thought belonged to them, even though none of it was theirs. Once I said the words, they carried it out like what it was, their takings. They paused when the sun crested a neighbor's rooftop. A beam of golden light lit my son's face, and he hesitated. He pressed his finger against his temple, as though trying to steady a wavering thought. His wife zipped up her coat and said something quietly. Maybe, come on. The children gathered a final toy each, then they climbed into the van and pulled away, leaving the driveway empty. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a long moment. No one had fought me. No one had screamed. No one had cried for mercy or demanded apology. They trusted my claim. That silent acknowledgement felt more powerful than any confrontation. Inside, I walked to the living room. It felt smaller now, but quieter in a way that brought relief instead of emptiness. The tree was still up, its lights glowing pale green and red. I reached out and touched the blanket that lay limp on the couch. My favorite wool blanket. It hadn't been touched in weeks because they used seat cushions instead. I carried it gently to the front bedroom. I closed the door after myself. Inside, the hardwood floor glowed in the morning light. I knelt by my bed and ran my hand across the rumpled quilt I had brought down from the attic. I sat on the edge and breathed in deeply, letting the scent of old cotton and home fill me. I closed my eyes. It was not just a bed. It was acknowledgement. It was a reminder that I belonged here, that I mattered, that I was not just someone's guest, but someone's backbone. I made the bed properly, smoothing the quilt, fluffing pillows, positioning the bedside table and lamp just as I liked. I placed the small china vase of lavender next to the lamp. It was one of the things I had packed away months earlier, and now I needed it here. I touched the petals lightly, feeling their fragility remind me of my own prayers. Then I walked through the house, room by room. I folded spare towels. I put clean sheets on guest beds, knowing they would likely see another family someday. I opened windows for fresh air. I swept a few corners. I didn't toss anything they left behind. Socks, a toy, an empty mug. But I did remove the clutter, not because it wasn't theirs anymore, but because it had overstayed its welcome in my clean space. I turned the key in the front door and locked it behind me. The sound was final, in a way I never expected locking out my own children would be. I felt my pulse at the back of my throat, but it was a calm pulse, a reminder that I still possessed home, control, and self-respect. I carried fresh flowers from the garden into the kitchen and arranged them in an empty pitcher. I set a cup of tea on the table and sat down. The house was silent except for the ticking clock. I closed my eyes again and let it all sink in. The weight of those boxes gone, the echoes of their voices fading, the room my bed belonged to, restored. There was no hatred in me, no vengeance, just clarity, just peace. They had taken their things. I had left them a house to call home, but I had taken something more. They had taken back the home that was theirs, only by my goodwill. I had allowed them to believe in a shared space, but now they know it was mine, and now I know it is mine. Slowly, I stood and walked outside onto the porch. I watched the sunrise hit the mailbox and the sidewalk. The day felt raw and new. I paused, looked up at the sky and whispered a blessing. I am still here. I belong. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. After January 3rd, the house felt like a blank canvas waiting for color, warmth, life. I decided I would paint my own masterpiece, a home that truly belonged to me. The first thing I did was walk into the yard and plant flowers. I chose marigolds, lavender, daisies, bright colors that welcomed birds and light. I dug holes with my bare hands, kneeling in the dirt as though reconnecting with myself. The petals rustled in the breeze, and I whispered small words of gratitude to the earth. Inside, I went room by room, breathing hope into every corner. In the kitchen, I painted one wall a gentle sage green, where once it was dull white. I bought a new kitchen chair, wicker-backed and sturdy, where I could sit comfortably while reading or sipping tea. I hung up a small painting I had made years ago, a watercolor of wildflowers by a stream. The breeze came through the open window, and I felt like I was coming home to myself. My living room received new cushions, softer, cushioned in cream and blue. I opened all the windows, threw fresh curtains up, and draped a quilt over the armchair. Everything felt soft yet familiar, like an old dream corrected. I lit a few candles that spread gentle fragrance of vanilla and citrus. In the space that was once crowded with boxes and borrowed furniture, I planted a rubber leaf plant and put a small wooden shelf beside it, with 2 books I loved, one on gardening and one on memoirs. I tested out each corner with attention until I felt calm and settled. In the afternoons, I began attending a gentle yoga class at the senior center a few miles away. I had never thought I'd stretch in a group or hold warrior poses after 70, but the instructor guided us through quiet movement and careful breathing. I felt muscles waking after years of carrying burdens. I made friends, a woman named Clara who liked poetry, and a man named Hank who'd served in Alaska and loved to talk about salmon. We walked home after class, sharing iced tea and stories of grandchildren and gardens. Both promised to visit me soon, and I felt my heart expand with something tender I thought had been lost. I saved up for a small trip to Sedona. I stayed in a cozy bed and breakfast overlooking red rock cliffs. I walked through hiking paths with my cane, felt the sun on my face, the wind pooling at my hair. I drank hot tea with strangers who became friends when they offered me postcards from their travels. I bought a pair of turquoise earrings from a local artist, small reminders of my courage and renewal. I returned home with fresh photos pinned to the refrigerator, winding up inside me like a promise of more days to come. One evening, I sat at my computer and began writing. I typed a short message and recorded a video of the corner of my living room, the plant, the new armchair, the walls that felt alive again. I spoke to the camera in clear voice. I used to think giving meant staying quiet. Now, I know giving needs boundaries. I shared how I had cared for my family, how I had lost my bed, how I had learned that kindness doesn't require invisibility. I talked about living kindly without vanishing. I uploaded the video and held my breath. I told myself that if only my neighbors watched it, that would be enough. But it did more. It reached farther. A few days later, I saw the views climbing. Then the comments started. "You are so brave. Thank you for reminding us how to set boundaries with love. Your story made me call my mama and apologize." I saw messages from people my age and younger both, saying they too had given too much until they disappeared. My heart hammered with something like gratitude. I read each message slowly. I told Clara about it over coffee, and she smiled wide and squeezed my hand. Hank winked and said, "Well done, partner." I posted a second video, showing my backyard now in bloom. the wind chimes tinkling, and the lavender in summer bloom. I said, "Here is a home you work for, not one you just show up to. A home women built with joy and pain." That too went viral, on a smaller wave but bigger than my words. I received emails from a local newspaper and a podcast asking me to tell my story again. I declined politely, saying I believed real change happens in quiet rooms, not headlines. In my house, I kept living my life. I made soup for Clara and Hank on Thursdays. I watered the plants Thursday mornings, brewed tea Thursday nights, and trimmed my lilac bush Fridays before the sun was high. I invited neighbors over to watch old movies, black and white comedies, westerns, gardening shows, with popcorn and lemon bars. My grandchildren visited once. They came in quietly, saw the new curtains and the lavender plant. They looked at me differently. Emma asked if we could bake cookies. I agreed, and we each wore an apron, and flour covered our cheeks. I showed them how to use the rolling pin, how to taste test the dough. They watched me as though seeing me for the first time. Not a grandmother who sleeps on floors, but a grandmother with wisdom, space, and love. They hugged me when they left. "You smell good," Jack said, sniffing the lavender in my hair. I thought maybe they finally saw me not as a burden, but as someone who belongs. At night, I sit in my wicker chair by the window and look out at the flower beds I planted. I think of the lessons I learned, of the people who reached out, of the woman I have become. I think boundaries are not walls. They are kindness structures. They allow love to breathe. They allow presence to bloom. And I realize my house isn't just walls and doors. It is a home because I reclaimed it. It is a home because I reclaimed me. I would not trade this second chance for anything. And when I close my eyes at night, I sleep without pain or apology. I sleep in my bed, in a house built with my hands, my heart, and now, my words. 1 year later, my house smelled of cinnamon, butter, and fresh pine. The living room glowed with soft lights wrapped around the windows, a modest tree in the corner, and a fire that crackled gently in the hearth. My friends from the senior center, Clara, Hank, Miriam, and Doris, were gathered around my kitchen table. We wore matching red aprons, all slightly flour-dusted, and shaped dough into stars, trees, and hearts. Hank insisted on baking gingerbread men with broken arms, because no one is perfect. We laughed so hard I had to sit down to breathe. After the cookies cooled, we wrapped them in parchment and tied them with ribbon. Miriam brought homemade eggnog. Doris told a story about her first Christmas as a newlywed during wartime. I sat back in my chair and listened, letting the comfort of shared memory fill the air like music. We exchanged small gifts, bookmarks, hand lotions, a scarf. I gave Clara a set of herb seeds. She gave me a jar of wild honey. Outside, snow began to fall gently across the yard. I walked onto the porch with a cup of tea, cradling it in both hands. The neighborhood was quiet, except for distant laughter and the sound of wind sweeping past my wind chimes. I looked at the footprints in the snow from earlier visitors and smiled. This Christmas, I wasn't hosting anyone who didn't see me. Later that evening, I found a letter in the mailbox. A real letter, not a card, not a bill. A handwritten envelope, with my name in careful, slightly unsure cursive. I carried it inside and opened it by the fire. It was from Jack, my oldest grandchild. "Dear Grandma," it began. "I miss you. I didn't understand how we made you feel. I thought you were just always there, like a lamp that turns on when you need light. I didn't know we were hurting you. I didn't know we took too much and gave too little. I want to visit, if that's okay. I want to see you. I miss your cookies, your stories. I miss you." I stared at the page until the words blurred, then folded it carefully and held it to my chest. I thought of that last night. The Christmas where I lost my bed but found my voice. And now, here was this boy, growing into a young man, holding out something fragile and real. I wrote back that night, "Dear Jack, you can visit, but I sleep in my bed, and I choose who is allowed under this roof. That's what makes it a home. I hope when you come, we can make cookies together. You can hang your own stocking on the mantel, but know this, I am no longer invisible. I am not a background character. I am your grandmother, and I deserve kindness. If you can offer that, you are welcome here. Love, Grandma." I placed the letter in an envelope, licked the seal and stamped it. I did not cry. I had already done all the crying I would ever need for that family. I returned to the kitchen. The cookies were stacked neatly. The tree lights blinked. Clara was humming something soft near the record player. We played an old carol, and we all began singing, voices slightly off, but full of warmth. That night I sat in my armchair and watched the fire burn down. The house was quiet, but full, not of people, of peace, of memory, of hope, a kind of fullness that has nothing to do with noise or numbers. I touched the back of the chair where I had once cried in silence. I looked around and felt proud, not just of the home I had reclaimed, but of the boundaries I had built. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors that close gently behind you when enough is enough. And I thought to myself, if anyone asks about this Christmas, I will tell them the truth. It was the warmest one I have ever had. Next time you take someone's bed, make sure it is not the one who owns the roof. Thank you for staying with me through this story. One of quiet strength, lost dignity, and the kind of justice that does not shout but stands firm. If you have ever been overlooked in your own home, if your sacrifices have been dismissed as duty, then you know how deeply this story cuts and how deeply it heals. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories for more real stories from women who were once silenced but never broken. Stories that remind the world respect has no expiration date, and neither does memory. Till next time, take care of your elders, and remember, next time you take someone's bed, make sure it is not the one who owns the roof.